The next conversation you're going to hear is interesting on many levels. You'll hear the importance of faith and looking after your spiritual needs. You'll hear the importance of nutrition and how everybody's bodies respond to nutrition differently and how important it is to find what's right for you. You'll hear conversations about Tourette's syndrome and what it's like growing up with this condition that is okay with you, but other people are not quite so comfortable around some of the things that you do as a result. Victoria has found a way to see her opportunities within her condition, within her life, and within her adversities that she has overcome and worked through, and now helps other people to work through as well. I bring you Victoria Davis.
Have you ever had one of those gut-wrenching moments where life ground you to your knees and you found yourself asking in despair, why me? This podcast is all about sharing your stories and journeys, from asking why me to declaring this is why me. Discover how ordinary human beings like you and I have found their extraordinary levels of hope, courage, compassion, and provided a new perspective for greater potential and self-empowerment during their darkest defining moment. As a creative artist and coach myself, my guests and I discuss the interconnectedness of emotion and transformation in those moments, and how their actions then seize the opportunity for discovering their unfiltered and authentic voice, and ultimately their life's purpose. I invite you to join me each week as we share insights into how adversity can be turned into a unique advantage.
Today's guest is Victoria Davis of Coach Victoria. She has worked through her own challenges of depression, anxiety, divorce, food issues, Tourette's, and more. And so, a little like myself, she has learned how to be resilient through adversity. Victoria understands your greatest areas of breakthrough hold the keys to transformation for those you're meant to influence in the health and wellness space. Welcome to the WhyMe podcast, Victoria.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you here and wonderful to finally connect face to face.
Yeah.
And we asked the big questions here first, such as if you had to choose one book that's really impacted your life, what would it be?
Man, there's so many. I think at this stage in my life, the one book that really impacted me, there's one called When Heaven Invades Earth. It's by an author called Bill Johnson, and it really challenged me to completely shift my understanding of what the supernatural is and heaven. And it really shifted my whole understanding of who God is. So that was, for me, like the most impactful book that I've ever read.
Wow. Yeah, I haven't read that particular one. I have read a couple of others that Bill Johnson's written. And I must say that when I started listening to podcasts, they were Bethel podcasts that I started listening to. That's what got me hooked.
You too. Yeah. They're fantastic.
Yeah, they are. Absolutely. And I mean, I still have quite a few Bethel DVDs where they have the behind the scenes stuff that happens first before the concerts. Fantastic. They're so good. So good.
Yeah. The whole, what they do and what they steward has really helped me break free from a lot of those, ideologies and mindsets of the religion that, is so captive, keeps people captive. And so it really helped me step into freedom for sure. So
I love hearing that. I had a very similar journey myself. So
yeah,
I understand.
Yeah.
So how about you tell us a little bit about your story, Victoria?
Yeah, I would love to. So essentially the starting point of the thing I remember the most in my life that really kind of, I guess, pushed me towards on the journey of self-discovery and resilience and all that would be when I was diagnosed with Tourette's syndrome at age 7. So having something like that I didn't realize would be so traumatic and impactful from such a young age, really shifted so much, and not really understanding and fully comprehending the gravity of what that could mean as a 7-year-old and what it encompassed, what it entailed, what that was. And so really, like, that's the first stage of me.
Right. And so for you, what led to getting that diagnosis? What were your symptoms and how did having that diagnosis then affect you?
Yeah. So, I mean, with Tourette syndrome, I think a lot of people just honestly think it's profanity or, swearing or loud, obnoxious noises. And while, yes, that's the condition is characterized by that for me, it was an inability to really focus on my schoolwork, constantly having the need to get up. And then I would do things that, I would tap a lot. My tics were a little bit different. I had a little bit of high pitched squeaks. I would blink a lot or roll my eyes a lot. So not everything was audible. A lot of it, was motor. I didn't really know that they were happening. I didn't really notice. And so it was brought to my dad. My dad raised me and my dad started to notice, but it was really brought to his attention by my second grade teacher, because I was in a small private school. And so it was really distracting for my classmates. And we thankfully had that intimacy and connection at that school that it was, I wasn't horribly bullied, but that was basically the turning point, that he had identified that something was up and was doing research. But when my classmates started to say things and my teacher noticed, that's when things really started to shift. And that's how then I started to become aware of the fact that something was different, but I didn't really know what that meant.
So knowing that something was different, I mean, you mentioned that you weren't really aware of those symptoms because, you're just doing what you did in daily life and not necessarily even understanding because you're not aware of that you actually are different to the other kids. What happened then once you got this awareness of what was going on? Like, did it make your symptoms worse? Did it make you more conscious of it? Did you become very worried about it? Like what sort of happened from there?
Yeah, I love that you're asking these questions because I think it's really important to dive into this because, I think a lot of times people just see you as a certain way. And so for me, and a lot of people think you have a choice, right? And so for me, what happened was I realized then, okay, what's different about me? Hey, Dad, what's going on? What's different? And I remember him taking me to the neurologist. I still remember that to this day. I'm in my 30s now. Going and the neurologist saying something along the lines of like, this will never change. The tics will wax and wane pretty much. And then as an adult, what he told me, that I remember now is you will always have this stuff, but we can just give you medication for it. And my dad was not about to do that. And so for me, I started to think something was wrong with me, and it was my fault. And so then I started to really fixate on the movements and the noises and get really upset with myself. And I really struggled to not cry all the time because I was little, and I just didn't know. I didn't have a grasp on what was truly happening and going on. So that was what I remember. And the one moment that stuck out from that stage in my life was I remember clear as day, a classmate made a comment and asked me if I was retarded, just straight up. And wow. I was 7.5, probably maybe at that point. And I didn't know what to do with that. I just was really defensive and upset. And so I think that that's kind of how I viewed it. And I didn't really understand that it wasn't my fault. And I took ownership of it, basically feeling like, okay, this is my condition, so I have to do something about it. And I probably deserved it. I mean, those were all the thoughts going on in my head at first, for sure.
And I think that's a natural reaction to have, particularly at that age too.
Yeah.
You don't fully comprehend that some of these things just are, and that you didn't choose this. You're not perpetuating it. You're not making it worse. You're not doing it for attention. And a lot of these things are words that do get thrown around. And I know a number of people with Tourette's, and I do understand that this is something that occurs on a spectrum. And so not every person is going to present the same, and people will have things that are similar but different. Some people will have a lot more symptoms, other people won't. And so it's not even that easy a process to get to the point to go, okay, we need a diagnosis here. But I think having a diagnosis at a young age sometimes can help, and sometimes it can make things worse. How did that part of it work for you? Like, was this something where you went, okay, I now have this thing that's got a name? I mean, were you able to connect with other people that had Tourette's to sort of feel like you weren't alone, or is this just a label that sort of stuck?
Yeah, so this interesting question. You know, what's funny is I didn't have anyone who I connected with. I didn't meet another person, honestly, who had Tourette's ever until I did an online interview series interviewing people about this. I had met people face to face who I believe had it because I could recognize it, but I never had a conversation or connection. I never had a community around it at all. Zero support. But what was really interesting is that my dad really took the time to look at the natural approaches. And so I believe because I was still so young, we were able to get ahead of what, the developmental side, and my tics dissipated. And about 90%. It took about 2 years of, radically changing my diet. And so I think I kind of went on that tangent because that connected to, because other people stopped seeing the tics, they didn't realize that I still had the condition.
Right.
And I never really talked about it. And because no one would know what to ask me, because I, definitely I processed differently, and have, executive functioning was different for me. And so I was kind of at war with that constantly. And I think that, thank God, I didn't really identify with the label so much. Yeah. But I always felt different. I always felt like why can't I focus the same as people? Or why do I view life differently as other people? But, there were so many positives with it too. But I kind of feel like it was this weird combination of, okay, I have the condition, but I don't really have it. So I had to grow up trying to understand what that really meant.
Gosh, it sounds like your dad was really quite amazing in supporting you in this journey, and as you said, not going down the pharmaceutical route, which that pharmaceutical route is never going to deal with the underlying condition. It's only ever going to deal with the symptoms. And so to have the foresight to go, you know what, if we look into this from another angle and try some other ways that are natural ways to look at approaching this condition from a different aspect, a different perspective, and see what helps. It sounds like that was a fantastic choice, really, or series of choices that your dad made on your behalf and with you, which is amazing.
Yeah, it truly was. I think because he never made me feel like something was wrong with me,
Yeah.
He always encouraged me to be me. But I do think, looking back, that it was more trauma that shaped a lot of who I was without me even consciously acknowledging that, even though I had a really fantastic, loving, supportive father who taught me who gave me skills and tools to really help me navigate. And then I decided to take ownership of it in my preteen year, really, probably around age 12, and applied the same things that we did together, and that carried over into adulthood.
What a wonderful way to approach this. And the thing that I think is interesting here too is that you were saying that, you changed your diet as well. And there is a very important link in looking at our bodies holistically. So when we're talking about the nervous system, and when we're talking about different things, conditions, illnesses, whatever it might be, sometimes people forget to look at the nutrition and what it is that we're feeding our body. And we've got to remember that our bodies are organic. And so when they receive the nutrition they need, they are better able to function at their optimal levels.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And what I think is fascinating and super unfortunate is in the community of the Tourette syndrome community that I really tried to tap into and get answers a couple of years ago, that it's so not that common, and it's so widely rejected to look at lifestyle. It just is it confused me, because I thought, I get medication has its place. I'm not anti-medication.
Yeah.
However, I was like, how in the world are we not connecting the dots with this? And I didn't realize that, that was normal in my household. But for me, what I've seen is the connection with neurological disorders or conditions. Nutrition is just now coming on the front of that, and I think that even, with things like anxiety and depression, they're starting to really showcase those studies, but it's still not widely believed or accepted at all that diet lifestyle can totally influence and have massive, profound, helpful effects. So, yeah.
Yeah, it absolutely can. And even if we just take me as an example, I always ate healthy, right? So I was one of these kids that rarely had any medication, and even when I had a headache, I really wouldn't take Panadol or anything. I'd just sort of work through it and drink extra water. And so I always ate lots of fruits and vegetables, good, healthy, balanced diet. And when I went through a lot of trauma, I'd always had breathing issues. However, I noticed that they were very much exacerbated after that process. And so as everything became more and more overwhelming, and there was a lot more stress on my body responded by getting more chronically ill. And at one point, I had a gastroenterologist said to me, we've checked everything, in terms of all the other symptoms that I was having with IBS and a whole heap of other things. He said, look, has anyone ever told you about the FODMAP diet? And I'm like, no, what's FODMAP? And he said, well, these are the different sugars, and he talked all about them. And he said, I actually believe you have a fructose intolerance, because he'd gone through my whole food plan of everything that I'd eaten. And so I went on the elimination phase, which is supposed to do for about 6 weeks. I did that for about 8 months, because as soon as I cut out most of the fruits, and pretty much all the fruits and vegetables, my stomach was starting to feel better, and I was starting to have less symptoms. So I went, oh, this is good. So I just didn't actually go off that elimination phase for ages. And then what happened was I slowly started introducing FODMAP-friendly foods, and I'm now 5 years on. I am now at a point where not only has my gut improved, but as my respiratory condition has had a specific treatment for the underlying blood disorder that causes that. So I'm on a combination of pharmaceutical and non. So I have that controlled there. I'm controlling my diet. I found an amazing natural supplement that takes the fructose out, but I now get all of my fruits and vegetables nutrition that I haven't had for the last 5 years.
Wow.
It's amazing. It's been this process, but now I can feel so much benefit. I mean, I felt benefit taking out what was affecting me, and now putting back in all that nutrient that I hadn't had. I've got so much energy. I feel so good. And again, my breathing, if I have an asthma attack now, it's not quite as bad, even when nothing else changed. And so you become living proof of how important nutrition, and I don't like the word diet, but only because people assume it with, trying to lose weight. And it's like, no, it's nutrition, it's healthy eating, it's learning what works for your body. And And I think that there's a lot to be said about becoming very connected in tune with your body and how it's reacting to food.
Yeah, I completely agree. I share the sentiment. I actually was vegan for 10 years and I thought my total identity got wrapped up in that. And I started getting sick. And my blood work started reflecting that. And being in corporate wellness as a coach and consultant and having to know this stuff, knowing it, but I'm really stubborn. And so knowing that and figuring that out through my blood work, I just couldn't believe it because, well, I went down the bunny trail of diving into the Bible, into scripture, and trying to find verses to support my beliefs that veganism was the best way. And that really bit me in the butt. And I did everything I could in veganism to, prepare my foods properly and avoid everything processed. And so I really did it right, if you want to say it like that, the way I thought. And then I was chronically fatigued. I was always hungry. I couldn't put on the muscle that I needed or retain it. And it was just, and I wasn't under eating. So I just knew something was wrong. And same thing as you, in a sense, my body was not absorbing the nutrients, it was not. And the lectins, and for me, there's just certain anti-nutrients rather in those bean legumes that I love, but because I was eating them in mass quantity, even though I rotated them, my body was just saying enough, screaming enough. And so it caused leaky gut and inflammation. And so, and I transitioned away from being vegan, and it was really, really hard. But really God healed me through that process, and I have never felt better, and so I think for me, that was really difficult to let go of. So it's a little bit different than you, but I also I share the sentiment, like I said, because it's crazy how you have to figure out what works for your particular body,
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's the thing. And let's just relate this to the Tourette's again. Everybody with Tourette's doesn't have the same symptoms because we all have a different body. We all have a different makeup. And so when we're talking about nutrition again, and some of this relates to genetics of, what part of the world your family originated from. And so their bodies were geared towards those sorts of foods that were readily available over there. And, over here it's different. So it's a very interesting area, and it's one that unfortunately we get a lot of conflicting views on. And so it really does come down to making your best informed choice yourself and trying out different ways to see what works best.
Yeah, absolutely. You're totally right.
Yeah, I think one thing that everyone agrees on though, less processed foods.
Yeah.
Cut out the fast foods, all that sort of stuff, and just get back to basics.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know why we overcomplicate what basics are. I've seen it time and time again with literally the thousands of coaching sessions that I've had. It's always the same question. What do I eat? What do I do? And we overcomplicate it because we have especially in the United States, the consumeristic give it to me now extra fast here, especially with COVID. It's obviously drastically changed that. However, because we have so many choices, I think, it causes that consumer dilemma type situation to where people just get stuck in indecision. It makes it much harder because we have too many choices. And so I think that you're totally right. If we could just avoid, honestly, boxed foods in and of themselves and start there, that would probably help majority of people with majority of their conditions, and then, tweaking it from there. But I completely agree with you.
Yeah. It's definitely about that one small change at a time, isn't it? And working your way up. Yeah. Absolutely. So I'm wondering, with some of the other conditions that I mentioned when I introduced you, you said about anxiety and depression. How much of Tourette's symptoms lean into depression and anxiety? It's Vera-Lee from Australia, the founder of the WhyMe Movement and podcast. Well, one idea, one vision, one person. This self-funded podcast and movement has started to take a life of its own, which is exactly where I had planned it would be. To hear the stories of the far-reaching impact across many countries in this world, it humbles me to know that my vision is shared, understood, and positively influencing people to look at the changes they can make for their own adversity and how they can find the strength, the courage to be inspired and feel connected and empowered to use their adversity to their advantage. One of the best ways that you can help support the WhyMe Movement and podcast is to subscribe to the various channels, such as the podcast platform you are listening to this on now and the YouTube channel, which has much bonus content released. By subscribing, you will make sure that you are one of the first to find out who is coming up next, more about our guests, and the interesting questions that I ask them, which do not get released on the podcast platforms, and lots of other good bonus content. I always love reading your comments, and so please feel free to leave them on each of the platforms. The beauty of social media is that you can easily share single episodes or any of that bonus content from YouTube onto your own social media platform with your friends, which helps to bring this positive, inspiring message to far more people, allowing you to be an active participant in the WhyMe movement and vision. On Apple Podcasts, it always makes a big difference if you can leave a rating, review, and subscribe to the show. Let's get back to today's story.
So what's interesting is there's a really cool diagram out there in the Tourette's world that says Tourette's and tics are just the tip of the iceberg. And, it really got me. It helped. Again, I didn't find this out till I was older. So it brought awareness and it brought this epiphany moment of, I get it now. And this is kind of an answer to your original question too about the label and the diagnosis. It helped me really understand this is what this means. And so with anxiety and depression, I had zero clue that those were connected. I didn't go on medication for those again, but when I finally figured out that they are very often linked, it helped me breathe. And so, I started to struggle with anxiety and depression as a 14-year-old, a freshman in high school. And I'm a happy person. I'm really joyful. And, but things would spiral quickly and I would freak out quickly. And then I get really sad quickly. And it didn't make a lot of sense. And I think from what I've learned and studied and observed and asked and, science that doesn't show a whole lot, but what I have gathered in my own experience is that I think because of the fear of what other people are going to say and the frustration and the anxiety, or it just really causes anxiety because you're not ever fully in control of your body. But then even me, who became in control of my body and was consciously aware of what was going on, there's so much neurologically going on, that I didn't realize how just interlinked those things are and how common that is. So there's anxiety, depression, like I was saying earlier, executive functioning disorder. So, the way you process, how you process, the positives are because of the excess dopamine. There's a ton of creativity that pours out of us, and I'm constantly thinking in overdrive as an adult, but I've learned to use that to my advantage. Another thing too, is if I have to sit still and I can't work out or run or do something, that's not good. And again, I've really had to let God shift that though, because I can still be free of that. I don't have to stay in that box. But what I really learned was to not let any of the symptoms or co-occurring conditions keep me in boxes and define me. But I learned to really lean into those and figure out how my lifestyle can look for myself, even if it weirded people out or even if they didn't get it or agree with it or support it. And so that has really kind of gone back to that point of it's super connected,
Yeah, for sure. And you're talking about the executive processing. I know that is one area on the autism spectrum that is particularly misunderstood, shall we say. So anybody who knows someone on that spectrum closely is aware of those moments where everything's going on here, because a lot of the time they will literally just stare at you blankly. And it's like, why aren't you answering? Why aren't you answering? And it's like, because there's so much going on here, like you said, 1,000,000 miles an hour. And so it's a matter of trying to process and compartmentalize that to get to the bit that you actually want to respond to be able to then respond. And those delays quite often are not accepted by other people, particularly when they don't know that that's the reason and that's what's going on. They just think this person's just staring at them or just ignoring them or just deciding not to respond,
Right.
Yeah. So that can be something very frustrating, I think. And like you said, some of these things, the consequence is increased anxiety, because having gone through that over and over and over with people who don't understand, then that thought gets planted. Oh, here we go again, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you have this constant expectation of people to always just reject you or look at you weird. And so you're physically in, I think, fight or flight mode.
Yeah.
So your cortisol level, that you're constantly shooting tons of cortisol is being shot through your body. And I think those are direct contributors, to a lot of these issues, right? We know that. Science shows us that. And so you're right. It's just this constant physical stress and anxiety that just can take over. And so, and it can become too much. And thankfully for me, it never got to that place to where I was suicidal. But I really struggled with myself, and I really struggled with functioning and just being tired of it, So, yeah.
Yeah. So how have you managed that, on those times when it is tough, it's particularly tough and you're having one of those days? And look, we all have one of those days in some way, shape or form. So,
always.
We all know what one of those days is like. What is your go-to management plan in essence? Like, how do you manage yourself when you're in a situation like that?
Yeah. Well, let's say if it's, what'll happen is my emotions will get ramped up. And I have learned I have to, in order to shift out of that, okay, for me, again, being a Christian, it's really important for me to take that time to pull back and ask God, okay, how do you see me right now? What's your truth about me? What's really going on? And hearing what I think he says and speaking that over myself has really helped in my adult years. But something else that's really practical that I do, and I know that this is also just a tool that's super helpful, is I have to physically remove myself from the space that I'm in. Yeah. Otherwise, staying in that space, even if it's a great space, if it's my house, it's my bedroom or my office or whatever, I have to physically get up and actually move my body. Because if that physical stress and anxiety stays in there, especially with, I call it like, I kind of feel like a superhuman sometimes, because there's this constant flow of energy. And that's why I talk with my hands too, but because it also helps. And I think that as an adult, again, I really fully believe that I'm very blessed, because I don't tick like, I just don't. But also there's that undercurrent. So what I'll do is I'll get up and physically go outside and move, or I'll work out. But I've also learned that moving first thing in the morning, getting in dedicated movement time is a non-negotiable. Like I cannot not have that. Rest days, even if there's a rest day, I typically will get up and go do some sort of movement outside, even if it's just walking, because I've just realized, it's just the emotional side of those things. Otherwise I'll sit there and it'll stew, and then it'll cause me to get smaller, and my mind will go to a really dark place, and I don't allow that anymore,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I love that you've recognized that, and physical movement. Sometimes physical movement isn't enough. So literally removing yourself into a different environment not only combines the physical change of your neurons going, okay, we're now moving, let's focus on that. It takes you then out of the visual environment as well. And I think too, I'm a very creative person. And when you mentioned before about having a lot of creativity because your mind's always going a million miles an hour, I would think that would help too, because then your visual system is engaged in something new and different, and so it almost sets that part of your brain alight and lets the anxiety part settle down.
Yes, and I'll speak into that too. You're absolutely right, because I have also learned that because I have so much happening constantly, I need an outlet, I need a channel. And so I grew up playing music, so I have a piano right back there. And so for me, sometimes it looks like that. Or I also write. I'm writing a book right now. And so sometimes for me, it looks like that. And what's funny is you would think that people that have Tourette syndrome are also connected. A lot of people that have ADD and ADHD, there's a lot of crossover there that you can't focus. And that's actually not true at all. It's just what you choose to focus on. And when you get in that zone, there's no getting us out of it. And that's really great. And so much happens in that space.
Yeah.
And so I've also learned to do that. You know, if I can't physically move and remove myself from an environment, that I'm going to pour into something that is creative with my body as well, that allows my brain to then get out what it needs to get out.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, look, I relate that to colouring in too. And I run a lot of clients through colouring in activities because as a kid, you know, I was one of those people, I loved colouring in, and I'm an artist. So, you know, colouring in's one of the things that I'm like, yay, bring it on, you know, I get really excited about it. But at the same time, what I realised going through a recovery group from domestic violence, there were 2 of us that were working artists in the group, and everybody else looked at a mandala on a page and some materials around. There were paints, there were crayons, there were textures, pencils, and they just sat there and looked at it for a while. And whereas my friend and I were like, yeah, we've already started. And then what I realized observing everybody was that, first of all, they were like, well, what's going on? Don't we do this in primary school? Like, we're adults. Why are we doing this? And so it was that whole, oh, wow, like I'd never thought of it that way because I am an artist, that they sort of put that in like almost the cut and paste and, you know, that sort of, well, you learn that at school and you never really actually unbox that ever again. Whereas in actual fact, we do heaps of that within our daily life. We just often aren't aware that that's what we're doing. We're using those skills. There's a good reason they teach us those skills. But what I observed most was that once I got over the excitement and just let myself be in that space of choosing intuitively a color or a medium that just felt right at the time and just going with it and totally letting go of the end process, which as an artist at that point in time I hadn't done. I was always focused on the end result, totally letting go of that end result and enjoying the process itself. The other women would watch that happening and then eventually they decided to have a go. And so it was a very releasing thing. And so visually, and I'll come back to your comment about still using your body, like when you're writing or playing your music, you are still using your body. And this is the thing, you're still initiating all those different nerves to get those movements happening, whether they're big movements or little ones, it's still creating that change. And it's so powerful. And sometimes taking care of that actually then allows you the mental space to actually think about other things that perhaps you didn't have the space to before.
That is such a good point. You're right, because what'll happen, I've noticed, is that if I have so much going on here that I don't get out either through verbal processing, because I think out loud through everything. And if I don't do that, or if I don't go to my outlet and again, for example, let's just say I have quiet time in the morning, if I don't write out stuff, then it stays there and I cannot focus on a conversation. I just cannot do it. And I get anxious, and people in my life now know, okay, go do whatever you need to do. And again, it's gotten way better as I've gotten older, and I've learned to just not listen to that stuff to it. It helps, you know? And so, but yeah, and you're right. It's really important to be in tune with your body so much so, and set up your lifestyle and your schedule around that stuff to allow you to be who you need to be. So
yeah, that's right. And I think setting up habits is a really good way to help anybody, conditions or not, because you set up these zones essentially, and it allows your body to perform optimally. And also as human beings, we like a certain amount of constant, a certain amount of, I know that this is going to happen today, you know, and so there is also comfort in the knowing what a day is going to unfold like as much as you can. So if you know that every morning you wake up and you have this routine you do, then that is a level of comfort that you acquire too after putting that into place. And so it is something that can help anybody get through an emotional space by falling back on those habits, provided that you've thought about how to set up those habits in the first place.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Me too, being an entrepreneur and having lived around the world literally and traveled a lot, I still like to get up at the same time. I still like to have my coffee in the morning. I still like to have my quiet time at the same time, even if I can do it later, and so I hear you. And I think that it's really good to have structure, because within that structure, there's discipline. And then that discipline also, I've learned, has allowed for more flexibility, because it also has created boundaries that keep my relationships in a super healthy and safe place. Because otherwise, if I don't have structure and I don't have habits and I don't have that discipline, then I'm exhausted, because I don't ever have the time I need for myself when I need it. And then I can't pour out into other people, and then I don't get things done. So yeah, I completely agree with you.
Yeah, it is very important. And the other thing that's important, of course, as we're living our lives, is connection to other people. And we've been talking about it at a few different places in the talk already, and in a few different ways. I'm interested to know, you did mention that you were married and you got divorced. Did your conditions play a role in that, or was that completely unrelated?
Yeah, actually, in a good way, it was really unrelated for the most part. Well, I can't say that entirely, but it wasn't something that really had an impact that was negative. Let's just say that. It took some time to understand each other fully, but it didn't really have that impact as to, oh, wow, this is a big thing we have to deal with. I think, though, that one thing that was unfortunate is with having anxiety and depression when I was younger, I wanted to go to counseling together as a couple, and several times throughout our marriage, but really it just always ended up being me. So that kind of perpetuated that feeling that, okay, it's me. And then that anxiety and depression would try to come back, basically. And there would be certain moments of that. So in that way, yes, that did impact us. But beyond that, no, actually.
So how do you help your clients now with what they're coming to you for?
Yeah, so now that has shifted so much over the years, and doesn't it always? But really the biggest thing that I have a big passion for, it's kind of twofold, is I like to consult businesses and corporations on building out wellness programming that fits their culture, their company's unique identity. I love to do that. But really my biggest passion is I really like to work with health and fitness coaches who have big dreams and a vision, but they're struggling perhaps to identify their niche and tie that into their purpose and their message. And I really like to help specifically women utilize their faith to create, values and to build programs and offers that really pull in, all of their difficult moments in their past, their breakthrough in their health in every area. And then especially the spiritual side of things, because I truly believe that is so important, and it gets left out in the health and wellness world a lot, or it's just touched on and it's not really a foundation. And so I really like to help coaches kind of figure out, okay, how can I own who I am and utilize that to create something that will create transformation for other people. And I really like to help them nail that down in a concrete way too. It's not just pie in the sky. And a lot of times the spiritual element when we're talking about health and wellness is. And I like to help them also get really clear on who they're meant to serve, because it's a really saturated industry. And there's a lot of talent out there that is left out because everyone as a health and fitness coach, don't you do everything? And even if you can, you really shouldn't. I think you're doing someone a disservice, and you're doing yourself a disservice because you're not stepping into what you're called to do. So that's what I love to do.
Yeah, look, I love the way that you explain that you can help people in that way because you've gone through this process yourself of understanding really at the core of who you are and what your purpose is. And as well that your faith is really important in that. And before we started recording, we spoke just a little bit about that. And it is something that I think people need to not be afraid to talk about, because judgment aside, and I would hope that, you know, one of the things that I talk about a lot is let's put our judgment aside, because judgment doesn't achieve anything.
Agreed.
So any judgment aside, just be open that it's okay for every single person to choose a faith of some sort that works for them. And it's actually not as much about which faith you choose. It's more about the fact that you are fulfilling your spiritual needs in some way, and that helps you trust that process and be more connected again. And lots of people talk about energy, and some people who are not going to relate to being of any faith will say, but I'm very connected to the earth and I'm very grounded and I work off the universe's energy. And, you know, to me, it's really all the same sort of thing, that we're tapping into what's around us.
Yeah, and I agree with you totally on that. You know, what's funny is I used to just think, okay, here's God. But then I realized, well, God created everything. My opinion, God created everything. And so energy comes from him too. So I'm going to take that and run with that and believe that. And, you know, and picking up, so another thing is I can actually feel people's emotions, and I didn't know what to do with that for a long time. And so in the world, you call that a mystic or an empathetic or an empath. And then the Christian term is you're just empathetic, or if you really are tapped into what I say is, you know, the Holy Spirit in that realm, you're like, oh, okay, maybe it's a spiritual gift. And so it's interesting how there's different language around it, but I'm like, but isn't it from the same person, you know? And it's not. And I think that's the biggest thing. What I've learned is to accept everyone on their journey, but to see that if he's really good all the time and he's up here and he created everything, that it's all the same essentially. And to see it through a different lens, and kind of connecting the dots with my health was, I tried to separate my health journey and when I spoke about health from my beliefs and my faith until they collided without my doing anything. When I got supernaturally healed 3 times in a row of different things, and I was just like, oh, you know, I had kind of hit that wall to where I really felt for me, God was saying, okay, I love you this much to do this for you, but now you have to speak about it, because I didn't heal myself. And, you know, certain things I did, but there were 3 specific instances that he did that. So at this point, that's why I love talking about it, because it's radically changed my life for the better. And I don't want other people to feel, other coaches in particular, to feel like they have to compartmentalize. Yeah,
it's really important. And this brings us back to being in tune with who you are as a person and your belief system and everything. It's about being authentically you. And the way that anybody is going to live the most fulfilled life is being authentically your own person. And so having the courage to delve into who that is sometimes a difficult, but always a very important way to get to what your purpose is here in this experience that we have while we're here on it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. I think that, and it's so important to honor everyone on their journey and understand and not just respect, but embrace the fact that we are all different on purpose. There's a reason for that. And the sooner we can do that, I think that really that would solve a lot of the world's problems. Yeah. But there's such a strong division, right now, and disunity. But I think that comes from us trying to push other people to conform to our ideologies, and our beliefs. And that's not, you're totally right. We can't do that.
Yeah, like that's going back to what you said earlier about that's putting it into a box, And it's like, no more boxes. Let's just all learn how to get along, understand ourselves. When we operate in our best version of ourselves, everyone would get along.
Yeah, you're totally right. We would.
Yeah, and that's a much more fulfilling life. And, it has its own type of freedom there. Just lastly, I'd love to know, in a nutshell, would you be the person you are today without having gone through all of those adversities?
No, not at all. And I will say that, Tourette's really shaped a lot of who I thought I was. But yeah, like I wouldn't have, it's crazy. I wouldn't have walked into freedom today and encountered that had I not had those trials and tribulations and challenges. And most recently in my life, having a divorce, I really was anti that for so long. And then when it happened, it actually afterwards really allowed me to step into who I am and own it for the first time in my life and be satisfied and love it and really live out of that place. So yeah, I can never look at those things and say, I wish they never happened, because I don't. I'm grateful for every single one of those things.
Yeah, I love that. And I understand that space too. I know that no matter what I went through, it has brought me to where I am now with all of the knowledge and experience that I have. And particularly when you're in a service industry, when you're helping other people, I have found that it allows other people to relate to you more easily because you have so much more life experience to draw upon to then understand their position and where they're coming from to then be able to help them best.
So true. Such a good point. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was lovely having you on today. If people would like to get in contact with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really easy. My website's just coachvictoriapatricia.com, and it's the same on Facebook. So that's where I'm at. That's where I hang out.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I will leave those links in the show notes as well for people to click on.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. It was so fun. I really appreciate it.
You're most welcome.
I think what it is it's allowed me to give other people grace, because I can't have an expectation of how they should be or respond. Mm-hmm. And just like you've learned, and it gives you empathy towards other people, but I don't know where in the world we got the whole it's right or it's wrong. I think it's different. But then when we say it's different, then we also attach this, okay, but we should elevate and it's like, just let's just all be us and not, it's hard to do that. I don't think we know how to fully do that. I think people like, well, you and me, who have really lived and seen that and had it really hit us in the face in negative ways probably too, it's forced us to take a step back. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. And this is why I love the ability to interview people like yourself on the podcast, because we're having these conversations so that more people will have them.
Yeah, no, and I love your mission, because it's important. We need it. People don't know how to change unless they're hit with stuff in the face or they hear from people that they connect to. So I love it.
Yeah, and look, sometimes we need to be hit in the face with something before we wake up and realize what's going on. And sometimes, again, there's no right or wrong about that. It's not about that. It's about the fact that when we become aware, what do we do with that? And so moving through that part of it, rather than looking at the why and getting stuck and, like you said, getting trapped in a box, let's just see things for the way they are and work with it. And
right.
Like I've worked out ways through my life to put that incessant, non-stop brain and creativity that it just explodes all the time in there. I've learned to put it into those zones where I can manage through whatever I'm doing. So I will pour myself into writing, and I'll pour myself into artwork, and I'll pour myself into, like, I often explain to people, because I used to do a lot of bookkeeping, and now I'm an office manager. I still do a lot of data entry. And something as simple as, I'm a real cadence person, so I love rhythm and I love repetition. So it's not uncommon for me to listen to one song over and over and over for days on end. That's okay to me. And my son's the same, yeah. Whereas most people, they would drive them insane. But it's like, no, this is what, this is good. And so literally doing touch typing on the numeric keypad, I will literally sit there and I'll go in a zone and I'll do it in a cadence. And I love that, you know. And so for me, again, like just simply doing that, it makes me actually more efficient at that task because I will just go into that zone. You just keep going, keep going, keep going. And it's just like a rhythm. And it's a way of managing that, which is a good way, you know.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. I think with music in particular, I mean, that's why I went to school for music originally. And there's certain songs that I have to hear it. Like, and so if there's a song that I connect with like that, the same thing, it's on repeat. And I will find songs specifically to run to in that space. And I can get into the groove much more if I can hear that over and over. And it's the same when I'm writing. I have specific playlists and songs, and I'm the same as you with that. I need to listen to that. So it's funny you mentioned that because I totally get it.
Yeah. No, I love it actually. And
me too.
Yeah. And it was funny, like, because when my son was very young, I used to set up like stations of noisy games, and he always liked the lights and he liked the noises. And I noticed he used to just keep going back to certain ones, and he'd stay there for hours at a time. And then he'd literally crash and fall asleep on the floor. Like he'd literally just go, and then he'd wake up. Like I'd just leave him there because he was comfortable. He'd wake up and then he'd go to the next station. He'd do the same thing, you know, and we're talking like he was like 2 years old. But even right throughout his life, you know, he used to grab my phone when he was about probably 10, and he'd record something on the phone, and then he'd replay it, and then he's really good at audio production type stuff. So he'd like sample it and then redo it, and then he'd line them all up and repeat, and then he'd have some bits that go fast, some bits that go slow, and he'd just sort of put it all together, and then you're hearing this same thing over and over and over. But the interesting thing was he changed the property of how it sounded by what he did to it, and yet it was still his voice doing whatever he was doing, and yet he changed it, and he would always create a cadence and a rhythm to it. And yeah, he used to play it, and I remember at one point he actually asked me, "Oh, does that bother you? You know, do you want me to turn it off?" I was like, "Why are you asking that?" Because like I've never asked him to turn anything off before, because I get it. And I think so many people don't. And I think that was probably somebody had said something to him at some point in time. Can you shut that off, you know?
It wouldn't have crossed his mind to just do that.
Yeah. So then he sort of became hyper aware about, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that. And it's like, no, you've always got permission to do whatever you need to in my house, because you know, I'm the same. But the funniest thing, because I tolerate his repetitive stuff, but then I'll start playing, you know, something in the car, and he's like, "No, enough. I've had enough. No, can we put my music on?" I'm like, "But we've been listening." He's like, "No, I need my music." So he's nearly 18, so he's doing his driver's license. He will not drive unless his music's on.
That's funny. So mine, I get him though, because actually, as a kid growing up, if there was a song on or a movie on or a game we were playing and I didn't like it, I would let everybody know. And I wanted them to change it. And my dad was always like, "It's not your place. It's not your thing." But because everything for me was so mild, I just kind of snapped out of it. But I think that that's definitely connected to that, because I would be really upset. It would really make me cry. And I was like, why would I, looking back, why the heck would I get upset? But that was just how I'm wired. And so I do that too with food. If I ordered something on a menu and then my dad ordered something else and I wanted his, when I saw it, I'd be really upset.
Yeah.
So I get it.
Yeah. No, it's a journey. And I mean, same with like the empath thing. Like I've always known I've been like that, and it's difficult sometimes because you do pick up on so much energy, and sometimes it's like, what do I do with that? Because if the other person's not receptive to working through it, and so like when I do my exclusive artworks for people, sometimes I'll create a piece and it feels right and I'll present it to them. They're like, "Oh, that doesn't that's not what I expected or wanted." And the interesting thing is, when you dig into that, there's a reason for it that they're associating to something that they're not even aware of. And once they become aware of it, they're like, "Oh, wow, that's exactly,
I hear you completely. And I think for me, one of my biggest things on the journey is I'm sure you've had the same experience, maybe in some ways, because of being able to be so empathetic and feel people's emotions my whole life. I would take on those emotions thinking that they were mine, and they weren't. And when I started to understand that I had the ability to ask Jesus, okay, or Holy Spirit, are these mine or are these somebody else's? And what do you want me to do with them? And it was recognizing that there's the spiritual element of this person over here is really mad, or this person's really, really happy. That's why my mood shifted, not because I was. And so, I know you probably completely relate to that.
Totally relate to it. And so I always knew I was going to do the WhyMe Movement. The podcast has sort of come out of that, but...
Well, another story, more WhyMe moments, and more reasons to feel inspired to change your adversity into your advantage. An integral part of the vision of the WhyMe movement is the ICE acronym, I is for inspire. When you feel inspired, you are more likely to take action. C is for two things, actually. Connection. You are not alone in this world. There are always people here who want to help you get through your adversity and feel positive about your life and your purpose. It is also for courage. Courage, in my opinion, is feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And there lies the importance of connection. For sometimes we don't feel we have the courage to do things on our own. And yet once we have the emotional support of those people who we trust, it can help us to feel that fear and do it anyway. And lastly, the E is for empower. When we have that connection and the courage and the inspiration to know, get our clarity of purpose, well, that is when we feel empowered to take the action that we want to do to change some aspect of our lives for the better. If you would like my personal support in this area to help you get through adversity in your life, you can contact me at Vera-Lee Original on social media.